Well, hello once again, fellow flight simmers and cockpit builders. Well, here I am again with another one of my back to basics videos. This one, we're going to talk about toggle switches. I think maybe toggle switches are probably one of the most common switch types that are used in airplanes, and I think probably even more common than push button switches, depending on the airplane. They're a little bit more complicated than push button switches because there are more options, as we'll see right now, but they're not that bad. But before we get started, as always, I would like to let you guys know once again that I am not affiliated with SimVimX or Real Sim Control, and I don't represent them. So this is just my point of view of how I interpret the website, the plugin, the way it works, and I'm just trying to make it easier for other people to build their home cockpit setups. All right, so let's go over to my table here, and we're going to start talking about different types of toggle switches. So toggle switches, of course, come in many different varieties. So we have like the most common on and off switch right here, and this is just a simple on and off kind of switch. Then we have some like this one here, which is an on, off, on switch. So those have two two poles, and then the ground, of course. And then you got, this is the same basic type of switch also, but this one is a momentary, so it bounces back. So this one would be also on, off, on, but it just bounces back to off after you release it. Okay, and then this one here is similar to that one, but this one, it stays in the position you put it in, so you can put it on, off, on. That's that. And then this one right here, this is one that I'm going to show like for the APU. So it has three positions also, but it's on, off, and then momentary on. And then it bounces back to the middle. So we use this one like for the APU, for the generator drive switches on like Boeing 737 and other airplanes. This one here is a little bit more, is the same kind of button as this one, but the terminal arrangement is different. So you can go that way, and that would be on, and then you go to the middle, and that can be on or off depending on how you connect the terminals here. And then you have a momentary on that goes back to center here. So that one, you can, it's a lot more flexible, so you can connect it all kinds of different ways. Now this one here, I talked about this one before, I believe, because it has a big handle, so I used it for the parking brake on my 737 wannabe home cockpit here. So this is an on, off, and on position switch. And then we got rocker switches like this one here. So this one has a momentary on, off, on. And this one actually also has two connections per terminal. So you can actually connect two different functions to it. So if you wanted to do like two functions like left and right or whatever, you can only use one switch to do both of them instead of having to use two switches. But of course they would be activated at the same time. And then you got weird switches like this one here. This is like I don't know what you would call it. It's like a lever switch, I guess, but you can get creative with it and also use it, in many different ways. So that would be an on, and then off when it's not touching anything, and then on over here as well. So, and these little ones, they're kind of like the same, as the big ones, of course, but this one just has two positions, so it's on, and that's all that one does. And this one here, although it looks exactly the same, this one is an on, stays there, off, and on. So whenever you buy your switches, you just have to look for whatever you need for your setup. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about toggle switches, because when I started building my home cockpit, I actually, because the APU, for example, I'm going to actually talk about that one when we go to connecting them and programming it and everything. The APU, obviously it has an off position, and then the center on position, which stays there, and then the momentary on position to actually start the APU. So in my infinite wisdom, when I started building my home cockpit, I said, okay, well, I need an off, on, and then momentary on switch in order for the APU to function properly, right? But that's not the way it works, because SimVimX and Real Sim Control, they have a lot of logic behind the scenes. So although you might think you need a switch with the off position on the top and on position that stays in the middle and then a momentary on position that you press down and then it bounces back to the middle. That's not the way it works. SimVimX expects an on off on switch, and they do the magic behind the scenes to make it actually do what the switch is supposed to do in the airplane. All right, so we're gonna go back here to my little table and we're gonna start connecting some switches. So I already have pre-wired some switches so I don't waste too much time. So this is a simple on and off switch. One of the things I wanted to mention is that normally, I think I mentioned it in the previous video that I'm now redoing. So the way the switch is lined up, or the handle, that's usually the way that you're gonna know when the on position is. So right here, the switch is kind of facing in this direction and there's no contact there, so that kind of tells you that's the off position. Now when you throw it this way, you see that it's kind of pointing in this direction, so that would tell you that it's making contact with the positive wire here. So that's how you can kind of tell, which one is going to be the on position. So when you mount it in the right place. So once again, the grounds, they're always going to go to the common ground. So because obviously in the Arduino we only have a couple of places where we have grounds, so we are going to use a common ground for the whole setup, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this one to pin number 43 over here. So there it is, connected on pin number 43 right there. Obviously the positive one is going to be the one that goes to the pin either on the Arduino directly or on the input multiplexers. And I am going to connect a few over here so that you guys also get to see that on every video. Okay, here we have another switch here. So this one is going to be, let me see. This is a momentary on and momentary on. So I think what I'm going to do for this one, I'm going to use it for the fire extinguisher test on the 737. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one, I'll put it on A0 and A1, which is analog pins. But as I mentioned before on other videos, you can also use the analog pins for digital inputs. So once again, we connect the ground to our common ground, and then I'm going to put this one here on A0, and the next one goes on A1. So one thing you got to remember is that when you connect toggle switches with multiple terminals or multiple contacts, they need to be one right after the other, that you cannot skip. So you can't decide like I want to put one on A0 and one on A8, or you can't put one on pin 45 or 43 and then another one on pin 50, because that would be like two completely different switches, and the SimVim plugin is not going to detect them properly. So they need to be right next to each other. Okay, same thing when I get to talk about multi-position rotary switches. All the contacts have to be one after the other, depending on how many positions it has. Now we got another switch here. This one is going to be a on, off, on. So that one right there, I'm going to connect on I'm going to do the nav strobe lights for that one. So that one will connect on the multiplexer, and we'll put it on pins 0 and 1. So we'll put this one here on 0 and this one here on 1. And then of course the common ground goes to the ground rail. Now another thing I forgot to mention that I'm going to talk about also once we get into the airplane. When you have obviously multiple poles or multiple connections, you have to kind of figure out, which way is going to be that way, and left and right, or up and down, or whatever your switch is going to do. So, if you connect it wrong and then you mount it into your home cockpit and everything, there would be two ways of correcting that. Well, actually there's three, which is one of the points I wanted to make. So either you could swap the terminals, so if you get it wrong, or you could mount the switch the other way in your setup if it's backwards. But there's also something in the SimVim plugin options, input options, that you can actually do an inversion in case you wired it wrong or you mounted it wrong in your home cockpit. So that's very handy, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit. All right, and last but not least, we have this other switch here. This one is a off or on, off, and momentary on, and it bounces back. So this one we're going to use for the APU. And so I'm going to connect this one. Let's see, I'm going to put it over here on pins number 10 and 11. And then of course I'm going to put the common ground together with everything else. So Now all the switches are connected. So one more thing I wanted to mention here. Remember that once you're building your home cockpit, your setup, and I mentioned this before also on the push button video, all your grounds can be daisy chained. So if you're gonna have a bunch of switches together, you can just go ground to ground to ground to ground, and then just take one of the grounds to the main ground wire. I have a couple of examples that I wanted to show you about that. So as you guys all know by now, when you are doing you're preparing your multiplexers for connection, you need to jumper the EN pin to the ground pin, and you need to put this resistor between 5 volts and the signal pin. So this pin, the EN pin, is going to be empty. So what I've done, throughout my setups, as you can see on this particular, my overhead panel here, I took the ground to the ground to the ground through all the grounds over here, and eventually I came to a place where everything joins up together, and then I took this ground wire and brought it over to the EN pin right here. So you can see right here that the ground wire comes to the EN pin right here. And then of course this ground wire is going to go over to the main ground of the whole system. So I just use the EN pin as my overall ground for connecting everything there. And this one here is another example that I took. Basically, I took all the ground wires and brought them all together. I could have probably done it a little bit neater on this one, but as you can see, everything joins up right here. And then this one goes to the EN pin here in the multiplexer. And then, of course, the ground wire goes to the main common ground wire of the whole system here. Okay, but now that we got everything connected, now we can go ahead and go to the website and start doing our configuration. So first things first, we go to the config tool, and we're going to start a new one here. So remember, we have a multiplexer here on pin number 8 of the Arduino. So first thing we have to do is we have to tell the configurator that we have a multiplexer on pin number 8, which we'll do there. Okay, and then if you remember, we have this switch here, which we're going to use for the APU. I believe this is the one for the APU. Yeah, so this is going to be the one for the APU. So we have it on 0 and 1 of the multiplexer there. So on the website, we're going to go to the aircraft 737, and we'll go right here to where the APU switch is. So we're going to use the APU right here, and we have it on 8, 0, and 1. And you can see that SimVimX already assigns the next one here. So it knows that it has to be two positions. So it already assigns the next one right here. Now this switch here, this is the one we're going to use for our nav and strobe lights. So luckily that is on the same little panel here on the configurator. So we're going to use it for the position lights right here. And it tells you it's a 3-position switch also. So you're going to put that, I think I put it on number 10 and 11. So we go to number 10, and you always select the first one, of course. You don't select, the second one. Because SimVimX, like I said right now, is going to assign the next one to it. So that's going to be the nav lights right there. And then we go back to our overhead panel, and we got the simple on and off switch. It's on pin number 43. So now we can go ahead and put the taxi lights, and this one gives you the option to use either just a normal switch or a 3-position switch, because I believe there are some airplanes that have off, auto, and on. So we're going to use the regular switch here, and this is not on the multiplexer, so we need to get out of the multiplexer here, and we need to go to direct input, and we have that on pin, I said it was 43, right? So we put that on pin number 43. Okay, and last but not least, we got this switch here, which is a off in the middle, and then it's a momentary on and momentary on to both positions. All right, so we're going to use that one for the fire extinguisher test. So we come over to the fire and pedestal test panel here, and we can select it for this here, the fire extinguisher test. And I believe I said we had that on A0 and A1, which is pin number 54. So that would be A0. So right here, it didn't actually put a little X right next to it, but you see that it erased A1 because it's taking up 2 places as well. One of the things also that you can remember is that when you do this, you see how it says it's a 2-way switch, and that's different than when it says it's a toggle switch, because those are the ones that spring back, and those are called H switches. So you can see that right here it puts an H in front of it. But if we go to the other switch, the regular toggle switch, it just has an S for switch. And now if we go back to our multiplexer and we go to the on off on switches for the toggle, that has a T for toggle switch. So that's how you can kind of differentiate what kind of switch the plugin is expecting. All right, so now we got everything saved, so we can go ahead and save our configuration file. And of course we say leave. We go to our SimVimX folder in the X-Plane Resources Plugins SimVimX, and we save it in there, and it has to be called just data. And remember, like I said in the previous video a couple of videos ago, do not add config to it because it already has it. So do not name it data.config, just data. And then you click save, and that's it. Okay, so now we jump into the simulator here, and we need to refresh our or reload our configuration, and it does detect 4 inputs and 0 outputs, so that's a good sign. All right, so we're going to test our taxi light first. As you can see, it already turned on because of the position that I already had it in, so that's a good sign too. So we can see that we can turn it on and off, and it works. It's working good. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and test. I believe this is the nav strobe light switch. So right now it's in the middle. You can see that in the simulator. It looks like it's in the middle right here. So now if we go down, let's just imagine we had it like this in our setup. So if we go down, you see that it went up, and then we go back to the middle, and then if we go up, it goes down there. So this is where I tell you that you can actually, that there's 3 ways to fix it. You can either flop the connections here, you can remount your switch in the simulator in your home cockpit, or you can come to the SimVimX input options right here. There you go, and then it'll recognize the last switch that you throw. So if we put the inversion here, and then you put save and reconnect, and then it refreshes. So there, now you can see that it goes down when you go down, back to the middle, and up. All right, and back to the middle. So that's how you use the input options to invert it in case you connected it or mounted it wrong. And last but not least, we're going to do the APU switch here. So right now it's in the middle. Let me get rid of this little window here a little bit. All right, so you got the APU switch right here. So right now it's in the middle. So now let's just say we mounted it like this with this side being up. So if we go up, you see that it goes down, which is not the right way. And then if we go to the momentary position, it's going to go back to on. So this one we also need to invert. So we can go ahead and click on the inversion here, and then save it again. And it already refreshed. So now when we go up, it does go up inside the simulator right here too. Then we go to on, and then to start, hold it, and release it. So everything's working the way it should. So that's pretty much how simple it is to use toggle switches with SimVimX and Real Sim Control and assign functions to them. One of the most important things, like I said, is just to kind of be a little bit aware of how your wiring connections are, your terminals. Make sure you don't skip any pins. They have to be consecutive pins. And then, if you happen to mount them wrong or wire them wrong, you always have the option of inversion in the SimVimX input options. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have for this video. Hopefully it was helpful and it cleared up any doubts you might have. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next one.